were not given the status of their fathers. Anyway, we are talking about African slavery. I should state that I like the fact that most Afro-Americans and the Caribbeans celebrate slavery. How sweet songs have evolved and how artistry or the arts has grown out of slave trade or out of a people being in bondage of slavery. Songs like Bob Marley's Buffalo Soldier, celebrating about someone being taken from Africa, are just an example of how the Afro-Americans and Caribbeans celebrate being in the years or coming from the generation that came out of slavery. From the Roots novel, you have a famous song of African-American slavery years, Kumbaya My Lord, or if you like, Come By My Lord. Yet, about 5 years ago, today, in the UK, when I was working as a manager in one of the Manchester shops, a customer of Caribbean descent pounced on me accusingly, saying that he felt as an African I should be dealt with because, according to him, we Africans sold our brothers, the Caribbeans, to the whites. I am not sure whether the present generations of Africans should own to that or should own that to our brothers and sisters from the Caribbeans or Americans. Relatively to this story, while visiting an Indian friend of mine, Jonathan, at his home to greet his father, who had just come from India, I encountered what left me considering as to what other races think of Africans. Having greeted him, the father, he asked how I felt to have been slaves. This, coming from nowhere, I was taken aback, since I never expected that someone, upon seeing an African in 2005, would think of him as a slave. I decided at that point to educate him. I said, slavery never started in Africa. I know there are many misconceptions about Africans being slaves, or when the word slave is mentioned, to be attached to the black people. But, reading the Bible, we hear of slavery right from the times of Abraham. And even in Jesus' time, a lot of Jewish people were slaves to the Roman masters, or their fellow more affluent Jews. Even in countries such as the UK, England, before the African slavery, there were white slaves to white masters. African slaves became more prominent, therefore, or more highlighted, if you like, after traders discovered that Africans were a very strong breed. They had discovered a people who were hard workers and felt they would fetch high prices if they were sold. That's how the African slave became prominent, the most powerful people. This is more fueled by miscommunication, misunderstanding, since most Africans who were captured never really understood anything until they were in America or Europe as slaves. Thus, there is a misconception about slavery being a shame to black people, being a shame to all African descents. The contrary is true. The truth is that the discovery of a people in Africa, so powerful, so energetic, excited the people who first visited Africa and felt they would be grand workers. People want Africans to own the slave trade, to feel ashamed of the shameful conduct of others. Instead, it should give us pride as Africans or African descent, especially more when you realize that there was and has ever been slavery on white to white people, which is still the case, as exemplified in the BBC London story of 2013, narrated earlier on in my talk. As we celebrate the Black History Month, we celebrate a people who by their nature are resolute, a people with bountiful beauty, a people endowed with Ubuntu, or if you like, Umuntu, being a person or being a human being. After all, civilization began in Africa. Our forefathers might have endured the hardest life ever, but we have come a long way. And our realization must make us proud. Yes, we cannot erase or we cannot erase the history, yet it is the same history that defines what a powerful people Africans and Black people are. There are so many myths, stories surrounding slavery. Slavery was not meant for Black people or Africans. Though it is agreed, it became defining or a defining way to stand on our history. In that vein, we cannot separate entirely African slave trade from colonization, though slave trade is pre-colonial. Abolition of slavery is another controversial subject, perhaps for a subject for another day. Both, however, have given birth to the more lethal form of slavery, the mental slavery, the mental slave. Many lessons in our parts or in other parts of the world have lowered high on greatness, on the presumptuous misconception of their being. And I believe it's time Africans use what would be termed as a misconception by others of their demeanor to their advantage in moving positively forward. Let's celebrate a people, our blood. Stop the misconceptions of slave trade on Africans. I thank you all for listening. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please, one more time. A big round of applause for this. I'm sure you'll agree with me that that was quite enlightening, quite educative. There's so much preconception about slave trade. Once you have slave trade, you think Black people. But it's refreshing to know that, that's not actually accurate. I remember also this whole story about the Jews being slaves to the Egyptians. From what you hear, my assumption was that Egyptians are white people, mixed race, light-skinned people. But with a bit of, research, I found out that Egyptians were Black people. When you talk about Tutankhamun, Nefertiti, Cleopatra, all these iconic figures, Black people with flat nose, okay, and black skin.